There's a kind of silence up here that don't exist anywhere else on Earth. Not the quiet of a church or a graveyard, but something deeper, like the mountain itself is holding its breath. That's the sound I sat in, crouched beside a stingy fire, nursing the last of my coffee grounds like they might give me something warm to cling to through the night. Outside, the snow was thick as wool and just as heavy, blinding everything beyond the windows. I hadn't seen another soul in 68 days. That's when the knock came. Not a polite tap, not a traveler's hopeful rapping. It was uneven, frantic, like someone was too cold or too hurt to use both hands. I froze, coffee halfway to my lips. Every instinct I'd sharpened over years of self-imposed exile screamed, "Don't move, let 'em pass, let the storm take 'em." But I didn't listen. I opened that door and everything I thought I'd buried came howling back in with the wind. She stumbled through the snowbank like it was her last step on Earth. Hair tangled, cheeks black with frostbite, arms clutched tight around a bundle so small I thought it was a rabbit at first. Then it cried, a thin, reedy wail that pierced me straight through. "Help," she said, lips cracked and bleeding. "Please, take my baby. I can't go any further." She collapsed before I could catch her. The baby, no bigger than a jug of molasses, slid down her coat, wrapped in nothing but rags and instinct. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the risk or try to reason it out. I moved. By the time I had the door barred and the woman laid out near the hearth, my cabin had changed. It wasn't mine alone anymore. It smelled like wet wool, blood, and milk gone sour. The baby whimpered against my chest, skin hot and damp, trying to root through my coat for something I didn't have. I peeled off layers, pressing her against my chest, sharing heat. Her breath was faint, like a whisper between worlds. The woman stirred once, eyelids fluttering. "Clara," she murmured. "Her name's Clara." Then she went still. The wind screamed outside like it was mourning something. I sat there, floor cold beneath me, an infant clutched to my ribs and a stranger dying by my fire. I should have been panicking, should have been angry that the world had shoved its need back into my life. But I wasn't. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not since before the war, before the betrayals, before I decided men were a thing I could live without. I felt needed, and it scared the hell out of me. She came and went through the night, her fever riding her like a ghost determined to tear her in two. I fed the fire with every scrap of kindling I had stacked, even burned half a chair I once carved with my brother back before I came up here to forget he ever existed. The baby, Clara, slept fitfully on my chest, her breath shallow, fingers like threadbare lace snagging on my shirt. I'd wrapped her in a blanket so thin it should have been useless, but I kept her pressed to my bare skin, cradled with the care of a man holding both a life and a test he never asked for. By first light, Miriam spoke again. I didn't know her name then, not until she whispered it like a prayer she'd long stopped believing in. Miriam. I crouched beside her, wiped snow melt and sweat from her brow with a cloth. She stared up at me, pupils wide with fever and fear,
and I knew she wasn't just seeing me. She was seeing every mile that brought her here, every mistake, every man that should have helped and didn't. "If I die," she croaked, "you keep her. Promise me. Don't let 'em find her." My throat clenched. I hadn't spoken aloud since late October. The words came rusty, dry as pine bark. What men? Her fingers dug into my wrist, weak but urgent. "Promise me." I looked at the baby. Little Clara, with her eyes shut and her mouth still searching. She was too new for a world this cruel. I knew what would happen if I said no. I also knew what it meant if I said yes. A life like mine can't be split down the middle. It either stays buried or it opens up and bleeds. Still, I nodded. "You have my word." Her eyes closed and a tear slid past her temple, not from pain but relief. I'd never seen that kind of peace before. Not on a dying man in battle, not even on my mother's face when the fever took her. This was different. She gave me her baby like she was handing over her soul and trusting I wouldn't drop it. The day passed in silence. Snow piled up against the windows, and I held Clara like she might fly away if I blinked too long. I boiled water for broth, mashed root vegetables, and spoon-fed Miriam when she was awake enough to swallow. She didn't ask who I was or why I lived alone in a cabin halfway to heaven. She just watched me with that slow, knowing stare, like she saw the broken pieces inside me and knew they weren't beyond repair. That night I wrapped Clara in flannel and tucked her beside Miriam. I sat in the rocker with my rifle across my lap, eyes on the door. It hit me then, hard as a hammer to the chest. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't just keeping them warm or giving them shelter. I was keeping a promise.
The wind died sometime before dawn, but the silence it left behind felt worse, like the mountain was waiting for something. Miriam's fever had broken in the night. She lay still but breathing steady, skin no longer ghostly pale, although her lips were still cracked and dry. I'd fed her a few more spoonfuls of broth before she drifted back under, clutching Clara like a talisman. I stepped outside, boots sinking deep into snow that reached mid-thigh. The sky was bruised lavender, not quite morning yet, not quite night either. The kind of stillness a man can get lost in if he ain't careful. That's when I saw the tracks. Fresh, not mine, not animal. Boot prints. Several sets, coming up from the eastern slope. I followed with my eyes, heart thumping low and mean in my chest. They stopped maybe 50 yards from the cabin, right at the tree line. Too far for clear sight, close enough to smell the smoke from my chimney. Someone had stood there, watching. Then left, but not far. I turned slowly, every part of me prickling like I was being drawn in a gunslinger's sights. My rifle felt too light in my hands all of a sudden. Back inside, I bolted the door and poured water into the kettle. The baby stirred in her mother's arms. Miriam opened her eyes when she heard my boots. "They're here," she said before I could speak. "You know who?" She nodded, slow and tired. "Crow's men. He's coming. He won't stop." Crow. I hadn't heard the name in years. It came with a taste. Gunmetal, smoke, blood. "What the hell's he want with you?" She held Clara closer. "Not me. Her." Before I could ask more, the voice came from outside. low, authoritative, rotten with charm. "Morning in there. I believe you got something belongs to me." I didn't answer. "You're harboring a fugitive and an abducted child. That makes you an accomplice." Miriam shook her head violently. "He's lying. She's mine. All mine." I stepped away from the hearth, picked up the Henry from its pegs over the mantel, checked the chamber. 5 shots, clean and oiled. I grabbed 2 more boxes from the shelf and laid them out in reach. My hands moved smooth, my breathing slowed. I opened the shutter, just a crack. 6 men that I could see. 3 had rifles aimed at the door. One of them, near the front, wore a long gray coat and a gambler's grin. That was Crow. I knew it without asking. His eyes searched the window like he could feel me behind it. "You got one chance. Send out the woman and the child. You'll be left in peace." I closed the shutter. Miriam's voice behind me. "He's never left anything in peace his whole life." I looked back at her. She wasn't trembling. She was holding her baby like a warrior holds a sword. My gut turned, and something inside me clicked into place. I pulled a second rifle from under the bed, loaded, took down the heavy axe and laid it beside the door. I ain't giving up anything. And for the first time since she'd walked through my door, Miriam smiled.
The first shot came at sunrise. It punched through the shutter like a hot nail. Splintered wood flying past my head. I dropped, rolled, and returned fire. One quick crack from the Henry, aimed low to scatter their feet. I heard one of them yelp and stumble, but the rest only dug in harder. "They're testing," I said, ducking behind the hearthstones. "You're not ready to breach yet." Miriam sat cross-legged by the fireplace, Clara tucked in the crook of her arm, a wet cloth across the baby's head to cool her fever. She nodded, face calm, almost cold. "How many?" she asked. "6 that I saw. Could be more now. He brought a damned posse." "I told you, he always comes heavy. He doesn't expect to lose." "Well," I muttered, reloading, "he ain't met me proper yet." Another volley rattled the cabin. A window shattered behind me, glass raining down on my cot. I felt something nick my shoulder, not deep, but hot. I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. Crow's voice came again, closer now. "Thomas Hale," he called out like an old friend. "I know that name. Civil War veteran, scout, sharpshooter, wasn't it? What are you doing holed up here, playing nursemaid?" He paused, let the silence breathe. "We don't want you. We want what's ours." Miriam's knuckles whitened around Clara. The baby whimpered in her sleep, too sick to cry proper. Crow continued. "That woman took something from me. That child carries blood that belongs to my family. You don't know what you're protecting." I moved to the corner and sighted through a crack in the boards. He was closer now, just past the snow-buried wagon I'd salvaged last spring. His men were fanned out, nervous, watching every window. I spotted one trying to flank the side, snapped off a shot and watched him fall back, yelling, his thigh pouring red. "You're not getting past this door," I shouted. The response came swift, a burst of gunfire from all sides. Bullets cracked through the logs, tore into the table, blew apart a jar of dried beans. Smoke filled the room. I couldn't see Marion for a second, and panic shot through me like lightning. Then a scream. Not from inside, from the door. A crash. They breached. The front door burst in off its hinges. 2 men came through. One went low, the other high. I caught the first with the butt of my rifle, felt his jaw give. The second lunged, tackled me hard. We crashed into the table. My head hit the floor, vision swimming. He drew a knife, slashed, missed, then screamed as Miriam drove a fire poker straight through his shoulder from behind. He collapsed with a grunt. I rolled free, grabbed the axe and swung. The handle cracked against the ribs of the first man trying to rise again. He crumpled, groaning. More footsteps on the porch. I aimed, fired once, then silence. They were retreating. Crow's voice rang out from behind the trees. "You think this is over? You think I brought all I've got?" He laughed. Laughed like a man with 10 more lives in his pocket. I slammed the broken door shut, jammed the frame with whatever I could find. My breath came hard. Smoke stung my eyes. Blood dripped down my arm, but I barely felt it. Miriam sat on the floor now, cradling Clara, both of them smeared with soot and grit, but alive. "You held," she said, voice soft. "I'll hold again," I told her, but I wasn't sure how many times.
The floor was soaked in blood and melted snow. One of the intruders groaned low in the corner, still breathing, but broken in half from the axe blow. The other was dead where he'd fallen, face half buried in spilled beans and ash. Smoke still hung in the air like a veil between me and the woman I'd sworn to protect. Miriam hadn't let Clara go. The baby whimpered once, then went quiet again, pressed to her mother's chest like she'd known all along that the safest place in the world was right there, even if the world itself was trying to kill her. I crouched beside the wounded man. His coat was soaked through. Steam rose off his skin. The poker hole in his shoulder wept dark and steady. He was shaking. "You say a word, and I'll let you live," I muttered, low and close. He looked at me sideways, teeth gritted. Then he spoke, voice gritty and thick with pain. "Crow ain't done. I know that already. He's gone to fetch the rest. He's got men camped down in the ravine, 30 or more. Wasn't supposed to be like this. Was just a grab. Quick, in and out." "Why the child?" I asked. He didn't answer. I jabbed the axe head down beside his neck, not cutting, just kissing skin. He flinched. "She's his, blood daughter. Her mama ran, tried to hide, said he'd never find 'em, but Crow don't let go. Ever." I stood and stepped back, looked to Miriam. Her face was blank, empty, like she'd stepped out of her own body just to keep from falling apart inside it. "He telling the truth?" I asked. She nodded, slow. "He's her father, not by choice." The room chilled. I turned back to the man on the floor. "You ride back. Tell Crow what happened here. Tell him this ain't a place he wants to visit twice." He shook his head. "He'll come anyway." "Then he's gonna die here." I let him crawl. Opened the door just long enough to watch him stumble into the snow, clutching his arm like it might fall off. I didn't care if he lived. I just needed him to carry a message soaked in pain. Back inside, Miriam moved for the first time since the attack. She stood, wobbled, then steadied. Her eyes met mine. "We have to go." I nodded. "He'll torch this place with us inside it." She blinked hard, bracing herself.
There's a ridge about 6 miles north. I stayed there once. Caves, one way in, steep climb, but defendable. Clara can't make 6 miles. She won't have to. We'll carry her. I started packing without another word. Ammunition, dried meat, a length of rope, 2 canteens. I found an old shawl, wrapped Clara tight. Miriam folded a second coat into her pack, trembling but sharp-eyed. We burned the rest. When we stepped out, I tossed a lantern against the blood-soaked table and watched fire take the cabin. I didn't feel anything. Not regret, not loss. That place wasn't mine anymore. It had served its purpose. We left south, then veered west, covered our tracks, crossed the frozen creek twice. I carried Clara most of the way, her tiny body barely a weight against my chest. But the vow, that was the weight I carried, and it was growing heavier by the hour. The sun fell behind the peaks, and shadows grew long and full of teeth. Somewhere behind us, Matthew Crow was gathering the rest of his dogs, but he'd have to climb to reach us now. And I knew how to make a mountain bleed.
We reached the ridge just as the light gave up the ghost. The final stretch was a hell-born scramble through wind-scoured drifts, our boots vanishing beneath powder, hands blistering on jagged stone. Miriam slipped twice. The second time she went to her knees and didn't move. I crouched beside her. We're close, just a little further. She shook her head, face streaked with sweat and snow. Take her. You go. Clara whimpered from the sling across my chest. Her fever had broken, but she was weak, eyes fluttering open and closed like a lantern on dying oil. I'm not leaving you, I said. You promised to protect her. I didn't promise to abandon you. She looked up at me then, really looked, eyes hollowed by fear, but burning too, with something raw and fierce beneath it. If he gets his hands on her, Thomas, he'll raise her to be like him, a crow. He'll twist her. I didn't respond with words, just hooked my arm under hers and hauled her up. We climbed the last stretch together, clawing up frozen rock until we reached the narrow mouth of the cave, just wide enough for one body at a time, a natural bottleneck. I'd seen men die trying to force through such places. That would be their mistake. Inside, the cave was tight and dry. I cleared loose stone, laid out our blankets, and tucked Clara between us. Her breathing was steadier. Miriam curled around her like a shield. Then, deep below us, flickers of firelight. Look, I whispered. She followed my gaze through the narrow gap in the rock. Down the slope, torches, dozens of them, a line of men threading up the mountain, slow and sure. One held a banner, crow's sign, a black raven with wings spread wide. They brought everything, Miriam said. I counted at least 25, probably more in the trees. Mules, rifles, ladders strapped across backs. Crow meant to root us out like badgers. I set the Henry down and started checking traps I'd carved long ago, back when this cave had been just another notch in my map. They'll try to climb the face, I said. I'll loosen the rock. One slip and they'll take the whole slope with them. Miriam stared at me. You've done this before. Something like it. She reached for my hand, held it a second longer than I expected. You're not who I thought you were. I ain't who I used to be. An hour passed. The torches got closer. Wind picked up, blowing down slope. Perfect. I took position above the narrowest bend and waited.
The moon caught glints off their rifles. They were close enough now I could hear them talking, grunting. One man slipped, another laughed. Then came the voice. "Thomas, I'm coming, friend. I'll take the girl gentle if you give her up now. You make me work for her, and I'll make you watch." I closed my eyes. For a second, I heard another voice, my own, years ago, promising never again to hold a gun in anger, promising I was done with death. Then Clara coughed, and the promise I made to her mother burned hotter than all the others I'd broken. I fired once, just above their heads, not to kill, to start. The echo ripped across the slope like thunder. Then came the avalanche. Snow cracked loose where I'd loosened the edge earlier, tons of it, shearing off in waves, smashing down into the line of torches. Screams rose, men scattered. I saw two vanish into the white, their lights snuffed like matches in a storm. I didn't stop to watch them die. I pulled back into the cave and wrapped my arms around Clara and Miriam as the night shook and the mountain roared back. Let Crow come now. If he wanted the girl, he'd have to take her from my cold, dead hands.
The ridge fell silent after the avalanche, like the mountain had drawn a breath and decided to keep it. Wind hissed across the face, stirring loose snow and fragments of shattered trees. The torches were gone, either buried, abandoned, or smothered. I held that silence in my chest, like maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then I saw him, climbing. Not fast, not smooth, but steady. One figure, no torch, just the outline of a man pulling himself up the rocks with bare, bloodied hands. His coat was torn, one arm hung limp, but he climbed like he'd been promised something, and he'd rather die than come home without it. Matthew Crow. I set the Henry aside. Didn't want a rifle between us. He reached the ledge, pulled himself up on one knee, and smiled like the devil himself had risen from the ice. "You always were a hard bastard, Hale." "I always was too proud to stay dead," I said, standing there with the axe. We faced each other in the narrow opening outside the cave. Miriam and Clara were behind me. I could hear the baby's soft breathing, the way she shifted now and then in sleep. She didn't cry, not once, like she knew this moment didn't belong to her. "You don't even know what you're fighting for," Crow said, his voice hoarse, lips cracked, blood matted one side of his face. "She's my blood. She's your victim. She's my legacy." I raised the axe. "Then your legacy ends here." He drew a pistol with his good hand. I didn't flinch. "Don't do it," I warned. But Crow never listened to warnings. He fired. The shot went wide. He was shaken. Pain or rage, I didn't care. He cocked again, raised the barrel. I charged. Steel met steel. The axe blade shattered the pistol clean in two, sparks flying. He swung the ruined handle at my face. I ducked and drove my shoulder into his chest. We hit the eyes hard, rolled near the ledge, kicking up snow and rock. He clawed for my throat. I caught his wrist, twisted, the bone cracked. He howled, and I headbutted him once, hard, felt the jolt run down my spine. He tried to scramble back. I didn't let him. I rose, boots crunching over shattered stone, and brought the axe down beside his head, just to stop him. He froze, breathing ragged. His one working hand pawed at the snow. At the edge of the cliff, the dark drop waited just beyond, the trees below looking like teeth. "Mercy!"
He gasped. "You don't have to—" "I had a daughter, and you made her mother run for her life. You sent men to kill a baby. You made your choice." He met my eyes then. No more charm, just a hollow man looking up at the better one. I stepped forward, and with one boot, I pushed him over the edge. There was no scream, just silence again. I stood there for a long minute, breathing hard, hands still trembling. Then I turned back to the cave. Miriam stood at the entrance, hair whipping in the wind, Clara cradled in her arms. She didn't say a word, just nodded. We didn't need to speak. It was over. For now. But something inside me had shifted. Something deep. Not just the vow. Not just the violence. I'd killed men before, but never to protect something that mattered. And God help me, that child mattered more than anything ever had.
The cabin looked smaller when we came back to it. Just blackened bones, half buried in snow. The roof had collapsed. The walls were caved in where fire and storm had eaten through. But the land still knew me. The wind still curled through the pine the same way it always had. And under the ash and ruin, there was still a place to begin again. I spent 3 days rebuilding. Miriam helped when she could, though her hands still shook from fever and fear. She never asked for more than a minute of rest before she was back beside me, hand in nails, holding beams. Clara stayed wrapped tight against her chest, watching me with those silent eyes that saw more than they should. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. I set the frame right this time, reinforced the windows, moved the stove closer to the center for heat, built a second room off the back, just big enough for a bed and a cradle. Miriam found an old chair still standing and nursed Clara there, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I caught myself stopping to listen more than once. When the roof was finished and the smoke curled from the chimney again, I stepped outside to split wood. The air was clean, sharp, the kind that cuts the nonsense out of your thoughts. I heard footsteps behind me. Miriam. She said, "You built this for us." I said, "I built it because we needed a roof." She didn't smile, just looked at me with that steady gaze. She said, "No, you didn't." We stood there a long time. Finally, I said it. "You planning to leave?" She said, "Are you?" I said, "No." She nodded. "Then neither are we." That night we sat around the fire, the new fire. Clara lay between us, bundled in a thick quilt Miriam had stitched together from scraps. She was plump now, color in her cheeks, her breath soft and strong. Miriam looked down at her daughter, then at me. She said, "You know she'll ask one day about him." I said, "I'll tell her the truth, that her mother was braver than any soldier I ever met, that she ran through fire and ice to keep her safe, and that her father died trying to take something he never deserved." Miriam's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She said, "She's lucky." I looked into the flames, my voice rough. "No, I'm the lucky one." The wind outside had calmed. The storm was gone, maybe for good, maybe just for now. But we were inside, warm, alive, fed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man waiting to die. I felt like a man who'd finally found a reason to live. And if the world came knocking again, men like Crow, storms like that blizzard, I'd meet 'em at the door, rifle in hand, same as before. Only this time, I wouldn't be defending a cabin. I'd be defending my family.